thank you very much for this nice introduction. Welcome. I'm the housekeeper here, so I don't have a black coat on, but you can ask me questions too when I'm here. Actually, what you have here on the podium with Intesa and Erste, the two only commercial banks in Europe that really, and by the way, we both have a very strong savings bank heritage, who actually have developed something like a financial life part. Most of financial education is being done by people like my governor. Most central banks in the world engage in that, but very few retail or commercial banks are actually engaging it. We are I think the two most prominent here in Europe, and we hope that many of our competitors will join us in the future. Financial education is not something that is NGO work. Financial education is not a requirement for the poor in the world. Financial education is not a requirement for the not very well educated ones. Financial education is an issue for everybody. It starts in politics and it ends in schools. And in all those spheres we have a dramatic lack of financial education, because we assumed that this is something that people learn along the way. And the lack of financial education is not only a problem for the poor, the lack of financial education is sometimes a problem for the very rich. And sometimes the very rich become very poor because of a lack of financial education. And it is definitely also a problem of the middle class. It's a problem that affects everybody, because we have seriously underestimated the necessity of bringing up our children with the knowledge on the relation of life and financial resources. And that is one of the most terrible things that happen to people, aside from illness or hunger or other disasters, that people are not able to adapt their lifestyle to their financial resources. If we look back to the beginning of the financial crisis, actually you could argue that the financial crisis was a result of a lack of financial education. Because if you look on how it developed in the way that after an enormous development of advancement, perceived advancement of financial products, not only were at some point in time the clients or the customers of financial institutions not able to understand the risk of financial products anymore, but it became very apparent that the people who believed to have the knowledge on how to manage risk, so the producers in the financial institutions, had lost track of what the real underlying risk of those products actually were. And the financial world has become dramatically more complicated in the 80s, in the 90s, and now in the 2000s than it was in the 50s, 60s, or 70s. And many people didn't realize it. And it brought us into a dramatic crisis. It was not only criminal behavior, which it was in certain institutions, it was not only greed, which it was in certain institutions, it was a pure lack of financial education on the people who actually produced products that brought the world into a dramatic financial crisis. Now, as a reaction to that, we have dramatically increased the impact of regulation in the financial services industry, and it has brought relief. It has brought substantially better capitalization of financial institutions, substantially better liquidity. It brought conduct initiatives, and so on and so on and so on. And a lot of that was very good. In certain parts, however, it now tries to eliminate, through various activities that limit the ability to actually create financial products, or limit the ability to sell, or limit the ability to buy financial products. We're now trying to eliminate risk from the financial world overall. And that is a consequence that just goes too far, because one thing we have to be aware of the fact is that the financial life, like all other parts of life, like health, is always at risk. You cannot live in a way that it prevents you from dying. It happens to everybody. You cannot have a financial return unless you take a risk. And particularly in the era in which we live in, children are being brought up with the belief that you can have a return without taking a risk. And that's just simply not true. And a lot of things happen because of a lack of people understanding financial products, financial services, and the financial world overall. Now, there are big differences from region to region, and of course, financial education is very limited in the lesser developed world, and of course, financial education is more advanced in the very developed world, and probably the most advanced in the Anglo-Saxon world, because it has the broadest variety of financial products. But it is something where we have to do an enormous amount of work in the future, because no matter how well and how fantastically regulators try to manage this industry, the risk will stay around with us, and it has to stay around with us, because without risk we cannot produce value. So people have to understand it. It has to become part of education. What we do, what Intesa does, what Erste Group does, what the central banks try to do, is to help to make aware of the fact that financial education is something incredibly important and incredibly needed. But in reality, it has to be on us to make sure that teaching the financial world becomes part of our school systems at some point in time. Knowing the financial world is about as important as knowing geography or history, because it accompanies you throughout your life. And I think nothing better could have happened, as tragic as it has been to many people, as this financial crisis. Something should never happen again. And that you cannot only prevent by trying to prevent financial institutions from selling something stupid. You can only do it also by educating the clients and the future clients. So we have to start at school. We have to make financial education part of our school system. And how can you raise awareness of politics if the group of people who support something becomes ever larger? So this event here today for me is in a way a start of a movement that hopefully ends up in some point in time, hundreds of thousands of people around the world joining us in our aim to make sure that young people of future generations who enter into their professional lives know that with probably a life expectancy at that time of a 15 or 16-year-old of another 85 to 95 years, that they have to start thinking sooner, and the sooner they start thinking about it, on how they will be able to manage to achieve a secure financial life until death. And then maybe even still leave a little bit, if possible, for their kids. So financial education is something for everybody. It's hugely important for the developing world, but it's also hugely important for the developed world. So I'm extremely happy that so many of you came to talk about it. I hope that you enjoy today and tomorrow. At least you will hopefully find out that if we as Erste Group run into a problem with our banking business, we can still run pretty profitable restaurant businesses. We have a couple of good ones here which we run on our own. That is what you call security. So spread our portfolio. I'm very happy that this happens in Vienna. I'm very happy that this happens at the campus. I hope some of you have seen the architecture of the campus, of which the Financial Life Park is really an integral part of. But it gave something to me. I'm in here now since about 15 months, and we moved in here in one go, 4,500 employees, and never in my life have I thought that architecture can have such an enormous influence on your mood. The number of so ill-tempered people in our group has reduced dramatically. And I'm really, honestly, in a much better mood than I was 2 years ago, so that sometimes my